A pregnant Sudanese woman convicted for apostasy. 300 schoolgirls abducted in Nigeria. They are the latest examples of religious persecution in the Middle East. Now, a new national solidarity movement of Christians are trying to stop the violence. Nina Shea, director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute, has the latest. And later, what are your children reading? It's Children's Book Week, and the stakes have never been higher. We'll discuss the societal effect of reading and how you can inspire it in your kids with New York Times best-selling author and illustrator Peter H. Reynolds. And finally, we'll visit the new leader of the Diocese of Orange, California. Here is plans to transform an icon of evangelical Christianity into a Catholic cathedral. My exclusive interview with Bishop Kevin VANN. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Nina Shea, Peter H. Reynolds, and Bishop Kevin VANN are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send your tweet to Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show. Or drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get to it. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. After 1 month with no sign of those 300 abducted schoolgirls, residents of the Nigerian capital, Abuja, staged a late-night vigil of protest. The Wednesday vigil marked 30 days since more than 300 schoolgirls were kidnapped by the jihadist group Boko Haram. At least 276 of the girls are still being held captive. Many of them were put on display in a video released earlier in the week. The jihadists are maintaining their threat to sell the girls into slavery. Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan has ruled out the militants' demands that he swap the girls for detained Boko Haram suspects. Besides kidnappings, Boko Haram is believed to be responsible for the deaths of some 12,000 Nigerians since 2012. In Sudan, on Thursday, a Christian woman was sentenced to death after being convicted of apostasy from Islam. 27-year-old Maryam Ibrahim is the daughter of an absentee Muslim father and was raised Christian by her mother. In 2011, she married a Christian. She was convicted on Sunday and given 4 days to repent and escape death. She failed to do so, according to authorities. The death sentence drew condemnation from Western embassies in Khartoum and from protesters outside the Sudanese court. Ibrahim was also sentenced to be given 100 lashes for committing, quote, illegitimate sex, that is to say, for having sexual relations with a non-Muslim man. Under Sudanese law, Ibrahim's marriage to a non-Muslim is regarded as void. Ibrahim and her husband have a 20-month-old son. She's 8 months pregnant with their second child. More on the continuing religious liberty atrocities committed around the world and what's being done about it in our next segment. Gay marriage received a lot of attention in the courts this week. On Tuesday, Idaho became the latest state to have a judge strike down its marriage laws. U.S. District Magistrate Judge Candy Dale ruled that Idaho's marriage law is unconstitutional, since marriage is a fundamental right for gays and lesbians. Republican Governor Butch Otter, a Roman Catholic, announced he will appeal. He noted, quote, in 2006, the people of Idaho exercised their fundamental right, reaffirming that marriage is the union of a man and a woman, end quote. And a student club at Harvard University dropped its sponsorship of a satanic black mass scheduled to take place inside a campus pub. A black mass is a satanic ceremony that mocks the Roman Catholic liturgy. The Harvard Cultural Studies Club announced at the last minute that Monday's ceremony, to be performed by the Satanic Temple of New York, would not be rescheduled and was canceled due to a lack of venue. The Archdiocese of Boston held a Eucharistic procession that began at MIT and culminated with a holy hour at St. Paul's in Harvard Square. Upwards of 2,000 people attended. Last week, Cardinal Sean O'Malley and the president of Harvard University both denounced the event, and a petition drive opposing the ceremony garnered nearly 60,000 signatures. The satanic ritual was later held at the Hong Kong Lounge, a local Chinese restaurant. Maybe they wanted spring rolls with their sacrilege. It attracted a crowd of about 50 or so Satanists, according to reports, and I imagine a few diners. And speaking of the devil and college campuses, a canonical lawsuit filed by the Exorcist author William Peter Blatty, asking the Vatican to restore the Catholic identity of Georgetown University, has received a response from the Holy See. Last fall, Blatty, a Georgetown alum, filed a petition with the Vatican asking that the Jesuit-run school be required to implement Ex Corde Ecclesiae, Pope St. John Paul II's apostolic constitution on colleges and universities, or forfeit the right to call itself Catholic. In a letter dated April 4th, the Secretary of the Congregation for Catholic Education, Archbishop Angelo Vincenzo Zani, called Blatty's petition a well-founded complaint. He added that the congregation is taking the issue seriously and is cooperating with the Society of Jesus in examining the canon lawsuit. Blatty told the National Catholic Register that he believes the Vatican's response is a positive step in a campaign to revive the Jesuit institution's commitment to its faith. And Christians in the Holy Land are protesting the ongoing vandalism of churches and holy sites ahead of Pope Francis's visit there. Protesters took to the streets of the northern city of Haifa and at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem to call for an end to the attacks. Jewish political radicals are believed to be behind the vandalism, according to reports, which over the years has included the desecration of churches and other Christian and Muslim sites. Israeli police are investigating, but so far they've had little success. At a press conference on Sunday, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Archbishop Tod, said authorities need to be doing more.
The unrestrained acts of vandalism poison the atmosphere. First of all, poison the atmosphere of coexistence and the atmosphere of collaboration, especially in these 2 weeks prior to the visit of Pope Francis.
Vandals or not, Pope Francis's journey to the Holy Land is around the corner. Be sure to tune in to EWTN for complete coverage beginning Friday, May the 23rd. You don't want to miss it. Go to EWTN.com for details and times. On a much lighter note, Pope Francis was greeted this weekend by some 300,000 school children on Saturday. Students from all over Italy filed into St. Peter's Square and packed several surrounding blocks. The Holy Father rode beyond the Vatican city borders in his Pope-mobile to greet his cheering throngs. During his address, Pope Francis told the kids he loved school because it helps us develop a sense of the true, the good, and the beautiful. He advised them to learn 3 languages: the language of the mind, the language of the heart, and the language of the hands. More on language, beauty, and truth in our children's literacy segment later in the show. And finally, a Vatican delegation visited Philadelphia this week, finalizing plans for the World Meeting of Families that will be held in the City of Brotherly Love in September of 2015. Philadelphia Archbishop Charles Chaput expressed confidence that Pope Francis would attend the event and is personally convinced that the Pope will make the trip. There's every indication he's coming, Archbishop Chaput said. The Vatican has yet to make an official statement, but popes have regularly participated in the World Meeting of Families. One way or another, EWTN will bring you full coverage of that event as well. When we return, Christians are the largest single religious group being persecuted throughout the world. Nina Shea will update us on international religious freedom, the latest flashpoints of religious intolerance, and a new movement to do something about it. The World Over Live continues in just a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Despite headlines indicating the contrary, most Westerners fail to appreciate the extent or the depth of the global scourge of religious persecution. We've been hearing a great deal about those kidnappings in Nigeria, the ongoing sectarian violence in Syria, and just this week, the conviction of a Christian woman in Sudan for apostasy. Joining us to shed light on these crises and to tell us about a new national movement opposing the violence is the director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute and co-author of the book Persecuted: The Global Assault on Christians, Nina Shea. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Raymond.
Let's start talking about this poor woman, this Christian woman, pregnant mother. She's found guilty of apostasy. Today, they said she needs to be hanged. How widespread is this? Is more of this coming? You've been writing about this for years.
Yeah, well, Sudan is part of this, the government of Sudan is part of this radicalist movement that's going on within the Muslim world. You're seeing a spread of extremism, and that's really one of the handful of governments that is so extreme that they would flog 100 lashes before they even kill her. They're hanging her for apostasy, or for basically for having sex with her husband.
Yeah, who's a Christian and not a Muslim. We reported that at the top of the show.
And she was given 2 weeks to renounce her faith, and she stood firm and said no. And for this, she is being killed.
Tell us about Pakistan. There you have a case of 68 lawyers. They came out and protested the detaining of a colleague, another lawyer, a Sunni lawyer. These are Muslims, by the way.
Yeah.
And they are now charged with blasphemy. What are these blasphemy codes? How widespread are they?
They're very widespread in the Muslim world, and they are harshest in places like Pakistan. Not only Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, but Pakistan has one of the worst. And let's don't forget Asia Bibi. She's a Christian woman, a Catholic, who was on death row, has been there since '09 for allegedly insulting Islam. So, you know, it's part of the same thing. It's a radicalization that's being mainstreamed in some of these governments. 964
people indicted under these blasphemy laws since the 80s. I mean, it is amazing the numbers you see. It seems the blasphemy laws, though, are being used as tools to either exact revenge on opposing Muslims, people who are on the other side, the Sunnis, or against Christian populations and non-Muslims. Is that what's happening?
Yes, they're disproportionately used against the minorities.
I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about these abductions. We are seeing there's so much coverage of these abductions all over the world, but really in Nigeria. These 300 young women have made the eyes of the world focus on them. What is happening here? Why is this Boko Haram doing something so outrageous and extreme? Clearly, they can't think they're winning something by abducting these girls.
They're a group that wants to impose a very extreme Islamic law on northern Nigeria. And Nigeria is Africa's largest country in terms of population. It has about 150, 70 million people, and half are Christian, half are Muslim. It would take an enormous amount of actually genocide to make this happen. And the North already has Islamic law, and they already have stoning. So this is an extremely extreme group.
Yeah.
And it's not, this is the scale of what has happened with these girls is unusual and is shocking. It has shocked the conscience of the world.
Yeah.
But in fact, they have been killing Christian men systematically for years. And I have spoken to some of the sole survivors of those attacks, where a man was shot in the head because he refused to renounce Jesus Christ.
I want to share a little audio, and this is a testimony that you all provided. This is to illustrate the brutality of Boko Haram. This is a clip of Deborah Peter. Now, she survived an abduction by Boko Haram, this jihadist group, in 2011, but not before they murdered her pastor father and her brother. Okay, take a look at this.
So the leader told them to kill him too. So they go ahead and shoot him twice in his chest. So he fall. When he fall, he started like moving. So so they go ahead and shoot him again, one in his mouth, and then he fall down and died. So I was in shock. I don't know what was happening. So so they put me in the middle of my dad and my brother.
put her in the middle of her dad and brother as they assassinated them both. I mean, this is just
all night long she sat there, and she couldn't talk for months, but she is speaking now because her sisters are now, I mean, she's from Chibok, where these girls were abducted in Borno, and she feels that they're her sisters, in fact, they're her relatives, some of them. She must speak out.
Nina Shea, the State Department has long disputed any religious motivation behind attacks like this. Up until very recently, they weren't even classified as a terrorist organization. Why the reluctance to make the connection between the religion and this? It's a genocide, and the genocide underway. Why not just say what it is?
Yeah, they have been saying that this is the result of poor delivery of government services, which is absurd. And solution, and that kind of analysis leads to a policy solution that is really counterproductive and dangerous, which is to give aid and give money to the neighborhoods and the places where Boko Haram is from.
The State Department, a spokesman today, actually, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Robert Jackson, said today in testimony that he's been urging Nigeria to reform its approach to Boko Haram, and he said, quote, when soldiers destroy towns, kill civilians, and detain innocent people with impunity, mistrust takes root. They are claiming that the Nigerian officials' approach has been a little heavy-handed, and that's why Boko Haram may be reacting this way. You would say what?
We need to get in there and find those girls. We need to find out who's funding Boko Haram. We need to cut off that funding. It has become more powerful in the last decade, and it's very, very dangerous for the Christians there and for us.
Now, there's an effort underway that I know you are a part of to galvanize Christians, and a number of people have signed on to this effort. And it's to, I guess, stand in solidarity with those who are persecuted and silent, voiceless in these lands. Tell us where this came from and how many people have already signed on.
Yeah, well, we've had Cardinal Wuerl of Washington who spoke at the rollout of this pledge of solidarity and call to action. He signed it. The head of the National Association of Evangelicals, the spokesman for the Southern Baptist Convention, the National Religious Broadcasters have all signed, Armenian, Greek, Orthodox. It's been an amazing outpouring. We've had several hundred very top religious leaders in America sign in solidarity with the Christians in 3 countries of the Middle East, Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, because these are the main countries where the Christian communities are, the largest Christian communities. They're persecuted and being driven out.
And they are pledging to do what?
3 things.
Christian organizations and leaders.
3 things. They're pledging to lead their call their congregations and communities in prayer, in education, and to engage in foreign policy, particularly to support a special envoy for minorities in the Middle East.
And what are they seeking policy-wise? What are they looking for?
What they want is a deep engagement by the administration to hear the views of these religious minorities, Christians and other small defenseless minorities. They don't have militias, they don't have tribes to protect them, there's no government protecting them, and they are being driven out. And when they're gone, the Middle East, the region where Christianity was born, will be inhospitable and devoid of Christians.
You can call in if you have a question for Nina. You can also email us, as some of you already are, at worldover@EWTN.com. The number 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S., internationally 205-271-2980. We have a first question here, Nina, and they're asking, why do we see this growth in Christian persecution? What is driving this suddenly in these lands?
Well, it's the growth of religious extremism in the Muslim world. And so there is, behind it is a rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And that started several decades ago. And we've seen extremist textbooks being distributed throughout the world, training of radical imams. And it's being played out in Syria right now and in the conflict in Syria, and also in the hostilities in Iraq and various other countries. But that is all coming home to roost, this training of extremists.
Tell me a little bit, and we're getting some questions about this. Are there Muslim leaders speaking out against this persecution, since in many cases it is Muslim communities being targeted?
Yes, and we're grateful to see especially the Nigerian Muslims speaking out and protesting, and that has really led to this Bring Back Our Girls campaign. But much more needs to be done. Really, there needs to be a condemnation of, killing for apostasy, like we're seeing happen with Miriam Ibrahim in Sudan today. She hasn't been executed yet, but it's going on right now.
Yeah.
Or the blasphemy laws in Pakistan. We need specific condemnations of these, mainstreaming of these radical acts.
But people on Capitol Hill and elsewhere in town tell me, look, we only have so much influence over that region. The United States has its own problems. What can we really do over there aside from sending aid and encouraging them to do things as we would like them done by allowing more religious liberty?
Well, for example, in Syria, we're supporting the rebels, some of the rebel factions, but we're not even talking to the Christian community and finding out what their precise problems are. Many of these rebel factions have preyed on the Christians. They killed a Jesuit Dutch priest just last month. He was a man of peace. So they shot him twice in the head after they dragged him out of his monastery. And it's on and on. A third of the churches in Syria have been destroyed. In Iraq, we didn't look at what was happening to the Christians and other minorities, and they have been decimated. Church leaders say between a half and 2/3 of the Christian population, ancient 2,000-year-old Christian population of Iraq has been driven out. And we gave our aid to Iraq for reconstruction. We gave it to the different Muslim powers. It did not get
to the Christian community.
To the Christian communities. Their communities did not get hooked up on the power grid, did not get sewage and water, did not get schools or roads, and their villages on the Nineveh Plain, some of them, were unlivable, and they're unviable, and they have been streaming out.
See, some people get upset, and we've seen these emails, and they say, you seem to be picking, Nina Shea, on the Obama administration. In fact,
no,
you were on this program when George Bush was in office.
Yes.
Saying,
I've been writing about this for 10 years. And in fact, the first coordinated bombing of churches in Iraq was 10 years ago in 2004. Wow. And several churches, and this is one of the things the Pledge of Solidarity outlines. I encourage your readers to Google it, the Pledge of Solidarity for the Middle East Christians.
We'll put it on the Facebook page.
Thank you. But it has 10 items listed about indicators. These are the concerns, the patterns of persecution in the Middle East, but they equally pertain to a place like Nigeria or Pakistan. They are really indicators of religious cleansing. And there's the abduction of women, there's the destruction of churches, there's the blowing up of, there's the killing of, targeting of leaders, Christian leaders. So you see all of these things, the dhimmi contracts, the really reducing Christians to second-class citizens so that they don't have rights, and they can't really live there. It's inhospitable.
It's an epidemic, and you have this ever-growing group of people being shoved from country to country, and there is so few. There are so few safe harbors for them now. Nina Shea, thank you again for your voice and your advocacy on this. Nina's latest book, Persecuted: The Global Assault on Christians, is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Literacy is falling in the U.S., particularly among children. On this Children's Book Week, we'll discuss the reasons for this alarming trend, the consequences, and what you can do to get your kids reading again. Author of The Dot, illustrator of the Judy Moody series, Peter H. Reynolds connects the dots for us when The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. This is the 95th annual Children's Book Week. It's an effort dedicated to exciting kids about reading. And a recent study shows that the number of children reading for fun is rapidly declining. Illiteracy breeds a host of societal problems, from unemployment to higher rates of incarceration. My next guest is a New York Times best-selling author, a children's author and illustrator of such works as The Dot and Rose's Garden, and his latest, Going Places. He's also known for his illustrations for the Judy Moody books. To offer his thoughts on getting your children to read and inspiring creativity, we're joined from Boston by Peter H. Reynolds. Peter, thanks for being with us.
An honor to be here with you, Raymond.
I want to share some of these sad statistics that we're reading about. Only 1/3 of fourth graders are proficient in reading. Half of 17-year-olds say they read for pleasure less than twice a year. What are we doing wrong here, Peter? What should parents be doing? What aren't they doing today?
Well, first of all, I want to just say that I don't think it's as bad as the media portrays.
Okay.
I definitely think there's a problem, but I'm an optimist. If you hang out with me, you know that I see the glass as half full. And I spend a lot of time with kids. And kids are, I don't think they've changed in extraordinary ways. I think they're just being fascinated with other things right now. Certainly technology is a big distractor. But I'm a big fan of books, as you know. I love books, and I think that what we can do to help is for kids to actually see us read for pleasure. And I think parents are addicted right now to their technology, and I would just love for people to switch off those phones and shut the laptop and open up a book and show your kids how fun it is to read, and also read out loud to your kids too. That's an art that's disappearing.
Yeah, I agree. There's nothing like that, and I'm sure you can remember in your own childhood, certainly in mine, you know, mom and dad reading to us. And I had a brother, a religious brother in school in 5th grade. I will never forget him, Brother Rayfield, and he would read Ellery Queen Mysteries, and he would only read the first 12 pages or so and stop. And then he'd put the book at the end of his desk, and he said, if you want to know the rest, you'll have to come borrow the book. And there was a stampede to the front of the room. What other strategies do you have for parents to kind of excite that love of reading?
Well, I think getting parents down to the library. I'm a big fan of libraries. I think it's a great equalizer, and it's still really one of the community centers, the most important community centers we have. And I think in recent years, people have, you know, they've been thinking that maybe technology might replace the library, and it is definitely not the case. And if you hang out with librarians, and if you spend time in a library, it's a wonderful, magical place. For me as a kid, I spent a lot of time at Chelmsford Public Library. I'd jump on my bicycle and race down, and the cool thing about a library is that you can kind of go in any direction.
Right.
In school, you're sort of told what to read, and in the library, you can choose your interest. And I'm very interested in interest-based education and reading. So if you find out what a child is interested in, find the book, match that child with the book that would interest them, and that goes a long, long way. You only have to find that first book that you fall in love with, and then, you know, the training wheels come off, and you're off for a lifetime.
You're off to the races. Peter, talk a little bit, and I want to get into your work in a moment, but talk a little bit about the way in which children's books, they not only excite the imagination of young readers, they're really shaping the world for them. They're shaping their internal compass, helping them make sense of the world. Talk to me a little bit about how important that is, giving them a sense of the moral universe, right and wrong, a sense of the world at large and their place in it.
Yeah, it's a way for kids to experience different realities, and also to have heroes. I'm a big fan of positive fiction. There are some people who say, well, as long as kids are reading, that's great. I actually think that we need to raise the bar and ask kids, you know, what are you reading? And ask parents, what are your kids reading? Because there's junky books out there, and it's like junk food, and then there's like really nutritious books out there as well that are really inspirational. Yeah. And you know, my favorite kinds of books are the ones that make you do some deep thinking and stay with you after you've read them and closed the pages. So, and that's what I try to strive in my work.
Yeah, no, and you've devoted yourself not only to creating these fantastic works, but also to promoting literacy and creativity. Now, tell me what happened in the 7th grade to you that sort of set you on this path.
Well, you know, I love to draw, and I was doodling my way through school, and not all teachers appreciated that fact. And many of them would say, you know, all eyes up front, you know, you could do that after school. And my math teacher, Mr. Matson in Chelmsford, Mass, he noticed that I was drawing, and he said, Peter, I want to talk to you after school. And so after class, he said to me, Peter, I would love it if you would pay attention to my math class. And he said, if you do that for me, I'll let you do an extra credit project. He said, look through the math textbook and see if there's a math concept that you could teach to another student using your art and your storytelling. Well, I was just, I couldn't believe my ears. I'm like, you know, art, storytelling, math, all in one sentence. And of course, he had to teach as well.
Right.
He was the first teacher that asked me to teach. And so I made a comic book and brought it in, and I showed Mr. Matson, and he said, Peter, do you know what you've done? And I said, I made a comic book. And he said, well, you did, but it's also called a storyboard. It's what a filmmaker uses to plan out a film. How would you like to make an animated film? And so I made my very first animated film at age 12, and that's what I'm doing today. My company is called Fable Vision, so, and we use storytelling, media, and technology to inspire and educate. And it was really my math teacher who connected the dots for me, and by asking me to tell a story.
Peter Reynolds, this book, The Dot, I have given this to children before. It is a fantastic meditation in some ways and just a great story about creativity. Tell me, was that little story you just told me the inspiration for this book? And how would you suggest parents instigate creativity in their children's lives?
In many ways, that experience was the cornerstone of that book. In the book, there's a little girl that says she can't draw. And there's a teacher who thinks differently in more ways than one. And her teacher dares little Vashti to make a mark. And Vashti leaves this one little, she jabs the paper and leaves one little mark behind. And the teacher takes a look at it and hands it back to Vashti and says, sign it. And Vashti thinks, well, I can't draw, but I can sign my name. When she walks into art class the next week, she sees her little dot, that little dot she had drawn, all framed in swirly gold. And then she goes on to be inspired to unleash her creativity. And I think both teachers and parents, being able to see a child's brilliance and genius before the child sees it in themselves is really the gift that we can give. And what I'd love to see is more parents spending time really getting to know their children, which seems funny because you live in the same house, but you know, there's so many distractions these days, and there's so much incoming, and we're not really spending time listening. And one of my big passions is to get people to have dinner together again, and really together, and turn off the technology, turn the TVs off and the cell phones, have dinner and have a conversation. And there's research that shows that dinner table conversation is one of the predictors of a successful journey. And so I'm a big fan of that. And then also I think that we need to address what's going on in schools. We've become a very test-centric school system, especially in public education in the United States anyway. And we've really become focused on the wrong thing. And it's really, I mean, good grades are terrific, but what are you going to actually do with all of that? You can read, write, and problem solve. What are you going to do with it? And I think teaching kids to be compassionate and you know, use their gifts and talents to make the world a better place is really the exciting conversation.
Yeah, and fiction teaches children that empathy and understanding because they're transposing themselves, almost entering the world of another person via these characters through fiction. So the societal power and importance of it, I think, is often underestimated. Talk to me a moment. You also run the Blue Bunny. It's an independent bookstore and toy shop. What are you hearing from parents? What are you seeing that give you signs of hope? And what do you see out there that's distressing? What are they looking for?
Well, it was a great opportunity for me and my twin brother Paul to give back to our community. We live in Dedham, Massachusetts, and we didn't have a children's bookstore, so we opened one. And it's not only children's books, but it's it's games and toys and art supplies, and it's really a creativity center for us. And the wonderful thing is that parents really want to give their children the best, and they come into our bookstore, and we're kind of like the creativity concierge. They come in and they say, you know, it's been a long time since I've been a kid. Remind me what does a 5-year-old want? And well, actually, that is interesting because I just said, what do they want? And there's what do they need? Because kids will say that they want a lollipop, but they might need a well-cooked meal. So in the same way that kids might be asking for media, we have to really engage and say, you know, what do kids need? And I'm encouraged that there are the parents that are coming in and the grandparents too. They've become very passionate about books, and they're sort of seeing that this is one of those great institutions that is endangered. And you know, with technology coming in, I think they're frightened that the physical book might disappear. And from what we've seen in our bookstore, that's not going to happen for at least a few more generations.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
Yeah, there's a real passion for the real book, especially for children's.
Yeah, kids still like
books.
that tactile experience of having the book. And I even find when we download books, e-books for the kids, they'll read a few chapters and then they lose interest. They want the hard book, put the bookmark in, mark things up, and dog-ear the page. They want to live with the book. So I think that's probably its own creative outlet in a way. You know, it becomes a companion almost to them. Peter, before I let you go, what are the 3 books that left the most lasting impression on you, children's books, if you had to name them?
Wow. That's a big question. Well, I would say Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. That was one of the books that kind of blew me away as a kid. And I think it was the first book that I read myself from start to finish. And it was fun to know that there are adults that have imaginations. Yeah. And it was, in some ways, it was a wild, fantastic story, and in some ways, it was a very real story. And it reminded me of Dickens. And in fact, my sister, our big sister Jane, would read to us, our little sister Renee and my brother Paul, my big brother Paul, who's 14 minutes older than me. And she would read us Shakespeare, she would read us, but I remember Charles Dickens especially really sticking with us, sticking with me. And then I think my 3rd favorite book of all time is actually this book right here, and I love showing kids this book. And there's,
I love it. There's nothing on the pages. Waiting to be, waiting for creativity.
Exactly. So I love asking, showing this to kids and say, why is this my favorite book? And it's probably one of my favorite conversations that I have with kids. And of course, they say it could be a place for your own stories, your ideas, your poems, your inventions. Well, it could be anything. And I remind them that every day when we wake up, we get one more page in that book, in our life story. And you have a choice. You can either let someone else write it, or you can write it. And that the main character can be someone really fantastic, can be a hero, and someone who can really make a difference and make their mark in the world. So, so I think that might be my all-time favorite book.
Peter Reynolds, thanks for sharing that. I love that. And I also, I so embrace your idea of not only providing children things they want to read, but nourishing works that allow them to grow while they're having a good time reading. And it's really our obligation to find those books for them and those journeys for them. Thank you so much for being with us.
A pleasure.
The Dot, Rose's Garden, and the newest, Going Places by Peter H. Reynolds are all available at bookstores everywhere and online. You can follow Peter's other initiatives by visiting his website, peterhreynolds.com. And my first book for kids, young and old, Kerman Durman and the Relic of Perilous Falls, premieres in September. If you'd like me to visit your school or bookstore, drop me a line at raymond@raymondarroyo.com. Put Kerman in the subject line. We'll see you on the tour. And Peter and I are both at the Book Expo in New York at the end of the month, so come see us. We'll sign some books for you. When we return, he's the new head of the Orange Diocese in California. He's got some big plans to transform an iconic building into his cathedral. Bishop Kevin VANN is up next. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest took over as the Bishop of the Diocese of Orange, California in 2012, after previously serving as Bishop of Fort Worth, Texas. I sat down with him recently in Southern California to talk about his hands-on ministry as well as his biggest project yet, transforming the iconic Crystal Cathedral into Christ Cathedral. As regular viewers of this program know, Bishop VANN recently partnered with Saddleback Church pastor Rick Warren on a mental health initiative which garnered international attention. We spoke about that as well during my exclusive interview with Bishop Kevin VANN. Tell me, how does a lab technician from Illinois end up in the land of Disney and Saddleback Mountain?
Do you know, Raymond, I've asked myself that many questions. Growing up in Central Illinois, as a child, I'd watch Sunday, The Wonderful World of Color with Walt Disney.
Sure.
At the same time, it would be at my grandparents' house, and my grandmother would watch Fulton Sheen.
Oh, boy.
You know, so I had all these visions of various things, and all of a sudden, years later, I'm here kind of connected with all that because Fulton Sheen was a good friend of Reverend Schuler as well.
That's right, and preached here. We're
Preached
on
here.
the former Crystal Cathedral campus, now the Christ Cathedral campus of the diocese, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, you have been here in Orange for a little over a year.
Right, year and 3 months.
Just barely. How is this different from Fort Worth, Texas, your previous assignment?
Do you know what I always tell folks is that the big difference for me is territory. Because in Fort Worth, they had 25,000 square miles I was responsible for. It's a diocese that I really grew in love with the people. I really learned a lot about being a pastor of a huge diocese. I learned how to minister in with many ethnic groups, Vietnamese, Hispanics, Tongans, Koreans, Filipinos, all that in Fort Worth in Texas. And then here, I come here, the same ethnic groups, but double the Catholic population, but 730 square miles as opposed to 25,000 square miles.
Wow.
So that's the big difference to me.
It's a more digestible imprint for you.
Well, it's easier to get to places and see multiple things in one day. In Texas, I'd have to do it over 2 days or something.
Now, and as you referenced a minute ago, half of your flock here is Asian and Latino. How has that, that prep time in Fort Worth prepared you for this? And is there anything of your lab training that you tap into today?
Okay, I would say when I was in Fort Worth, we had 4 Vietnamese parishes. So I was able to learn and understand some level the Vietnamese culture and to be able to learn some Vietnamese, liturgical Vietnamese for Mass. So I was able to build on that when I came here and learn a little more. And then, of course, in Fort Worth, I knew Spanish when I arrived there, but I was able to use it all the time there. And then here, it's casi lo mismo. I use it a lot here. So that was good preparation. And then my lab tech training, you know, I spent a lot of my life around a hospital. And so here, if I have time, I visit the hospitals. And so that's still part of my life. And having had that background in med tech, it gives me some sense of medical ethics and all those sort of things as well. So all that comes into play.
Yeah, well, we certainly have seen it in so many ways in your ministry. Talking to people here in Orange County, they tell me, and they refer to you as the bishop of the people. And the reason they say that is because, and I'm quoting a number of folks, not just one or two, who say, you turn around, Bishop VANN's at a parish. You go over here, he's at a parish cookout. You turn around, he's doing a funeral. He's everywhere. He seems to be everywhere. Now, as I've dug into this, it seems these parish visits are not just drop-bys. You don't just say hello, take a few pictures and a Mass, and you're out. You stay. I mean, you have dinner, you have lunch. In some cases, you're spending the night at the rectory. Why do you do that?
I would chalk it up to maybe a couple different sources. First of all, my mother and father raised us to always be concerned about others. My mother was a maternity nurse, took care of mothers and families. My father was a postal worker. They always were in service to others. I grew up in a wonderful parish in Springfield, Illinois, St. Agnes. Had a good example of the priests and all that, so I was always comfortable in a parochial environment. The bishop that ordained me many years ago now, Bishop Nicholas, was very much a people person, was always out in parishes. So I kind of had that as a role model pretty early on. And then my years as a pastor, Blessed Sacrament, Auburn, all these Decatur, all these places taught me the importance of being a pastor and being present. So I kind of learned over the years what a pastor was for me.
Right.
And then that became then sort of my frame of reference when I became the Bishop of Fort Worth. I mean, you'll recall that I was supposed to be in the coadjutor. It didn't happen. I became the bishop right away. So what did I have to fall back on was my years as a pastor. So that's kind of what was my kind of rule and guide in my life. And I've worked to always keep that as a part of my life ever since.
No, but I found that interesting and almost unique that the bishop goes and spends the night at the various rectories. Is that to get a better sense of the clergy and as well as the people? Well,
you can look at that two levels. What's prescribed for a bishop is parish visitations. If you look in the Code of Canon Law, you're supposed to do that. And so the best way to do that is to spend the week in a parish. So you have evening mass. So you have dinner with the priests. So you meet the staff and take your time. And then the next day I have all the masses and go to whatever socials and then visit the sick. I mean, so it's kind of, for me, it works that well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I want to talk about this amazing facility here, which is the new Christ Cathedral facility. And you've got an academy here and your chancery offices. There's this cultural center. There's so much happening here. I want to talk specifically first about the renowned Crystal Cathedral. Anybody who knows the Hour of Power and saw Reverend Schuller all those years, they know it. Would this have been your choice for a place of Catholic worship initially?
Let me put this in this context. Any assignment in my life as a priest and a bishop, I've never asked for. Everything's come to me. So I accept it as, this is where the Lord wants me to be. And in fact, there's a bit of a funny story. I was here in August of 2012 for the Knights of Columbus Supreme Convention. I came with my priest secretary from Fort Worth, and we got to tour the campus, and I met some of the folks. And I thought, this is a great place. I thought, this is huge. It's beautiful. What an opportunity. I thought, but this is going to be a lot of work for whoever inherits it, because I knew Bishop Brown well, who was going to retire. Well, lo and behold, 4 weeks later, I get the phone call that I'm coming here.
And you'd already taken the tour, thank God.
I had already taken the tour of it.
What are you doing to the interior of the Crystal Cathedral? Because it is so bright. It is not exactly a place amenable to shadow and mystery and solitude. What are you going to do?
Well, of course, the polity would be more congregational or Baptist or that sort of thing. And so if you're looking right now, for example, you'll see the seats aren't there and the organ's gone. The organ has gone back to Padua, Italy to be actually restored. I went to Padua to sign the contract at the Basilica of San Antonio.
Tough job.
Yeah, so I did that. But as well, we have what we call an Art and Architectural Renovation Committee, and that is working with Brother William Wolger out of Omaha, who has a very Catholic sense of things, and then 2 architects, one for the inside and one for the outside. And we're in the process of the renderings, and so it really is like taking a blank slate. How do you take what had been a polity that was preaching to one that's sacramental and mystery and sign and symbol? And the drawings will be done, I think, probably early this summer, I hope, perhaps. But I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, because I'm involved in a lot of the things.
We'll be amazed to see what happens in the years to come. Yes. This is a multi-year project,
It's a multi-year project, certainly. I think we're thinking maybe 2016 to have it completed.
But there was no cathedral here for the diocese?
No, because, if you look at the history of how dioceses are made,
very
similar in Fort Worth, because Fort Worth was created in '69 off of Dallas, here is '76 off of Los Angeles. The newer dioceses take a parish church and designate that at the cathedral.
I see.
So in Fort Worth it became St. Patrick's, here it became Holy Family in Orange. So you have a parish church that of course is the cathedral, but in the sense of the diocese, most people, it's still a parish church. So this then makes really a statement that this is a center for unity, art, music, welcome, faith, evangelization, and everything.
No, it's amazing. I want to shift gears a little bit, talk about your chairmanship of the Catholic Legal Immigration Network.
Certainly.
Now, this is a network of some 250 plus Catholic outreaches.
Right.
Why is the church engaged in that work? And give us some sense of what those organizations do.
Well, I am still learning because I just took it over for my first meeting last week. Oh, I would say about a year ago, Cardinal Dolan called me and said, would you take this over? He says, you had experience in Texas. He said, now I have experience in California with so many immigrant groups. He said, I think you'd be suited for that. So I said, well, and Tim's been a friend of mine for years. I said, well, let me kind of think about that. So he asked me a second time. So I said, yes, I would do that. So I had had experience with clinic, as we call it before, when I was in Texas, because part of the challenge these days is having religious workers come up and minister to the people.
Right.
So you have to get what's called an F1 visa for students or an R1, those sort of things. It's very complex, labor-intensive work. A clinic did that for us.
I see.
So I knew some of what they do. So part of it is helping priests and religious come up here to minister. It's a big part of it. Another one is working with refugees and those sorts of things. So I'm just kind of learning everything that they do. And we had our first board meeting last week.
Wow. Given what we've seen with the interaction between the church and the federal government vis-a-vis health care, why is the church so insistent and consistently going to the government for relief for immigrants and for these Catholic organizations that are helping them?
Let me speak to that as a pastor from my experience. For example, I tell you, I went to Ghana 4 or 5 years ago because I had a relationship with Archbishop Sarpong and Kumasi, who I knew because there were a lot of Ghanaians in Fort Worth. I had a meeting with the religious, with the priests, with the laity in the parish, in the cathedral. First question I ask is, how are you helping our families in Ghana who need help, who have problems with visas? How are you, Bishop, helping them? Then I've known several families who over the years have a number of children, but they live in constant fear of being deported and traveling any place. And so they want to be fully contributing members to this country that they love, like my Irish ancestors did. So I always approach that as a pastor. What can I do? How can we work together to try to take care of them spiritually, but also kind of help do what we can to try to rectify these situations?
Yeah, we hear from people all the time in the emails. This is such a delicate subject. It has risen and fallen many times on Capitol Hill. People ask the question, doesn't the church have an obligation, and isn't it going about its work to minister to these people, regardless of whether they're documented or undocumented? And doesn't the government have a separate role to control its borders and regulate immigration?
Again, what do you say to families that you meet when you say, Father, how can you help me? Father, we need help. We live in fear. What can you do to help us with this?
Yeah. And you feel the government is really the only, you have to.
I feel we have to keep our mind on how do we help these folks best as pastors who people care for souls and bodies to provide for them, to help them to live freely and not in fear.
Tell me about this mental health gathering that you and Rick Warren are doing here in Orange. This is extraordinary. It's the first time the diocese and Saddleback Church, this large evangelical church, have collaborated on a project. Why this one?
Well, let me kind of put this in a larger context. I've always been involved in ecumenical relationships, usually wherever I've been. But I came here to Orange and found a great network of ecumenical relationships, thanks to Bishop Brown and the ecumenical vicars who have worked with this for over years. So Rick, in fact, was at my installation. And so then we met shortly after that, sort of kept in touch. Then when his son committed suicide, I called him. And I would really call he and Kay just to check in on them monthly, every couple of weeks. They didn't have to respond back, but I called them. So he and I began to talk about all this afterwards. And so we kind of thought together, given the good relationships that are here in Orange County anyway between churches, how can we do something together? How can we do something that contributes to ourselves, Saddleback and ourselves, and NAMI, doing something that in common we can help those who struggle with these things.
What was your personal attachment and experience with this issue of mental health? I know as a pastor you encountered a number of people, particularly early in your ministry.
Yeah, well, I would say primarily, again, as a pastor, you know, so often people will come to the rectory, how can you help us? When you work with the homeless, you see folks who struggle, you know, obviously, and then folks who struggle with depression and other things. And, you know, I think I've said one of the first things I had to do as a newly ordained deacon in 1980, first funeral I ever preached was a person who committed suicide. That was Father said, yeah, this is what we're doing this week. So I did. So I had to deal with that and the family and everything, and then other things as well.
Yeah, so this conference is an attempt to do what?
The conference is how to help and equip, say, pastoral workers, church workers, parish workers, to be able to respond in a way that's helpful to make good referrals and appropriate referrals. Because so often when they would come or call, you don't know what to do. I would say here one of the things that we're doing is we're continuing the Hope line that Reverend Schuler had, a 24-hour line where people call in when they have concerns about taking their life. Wow. It's called the Hope line. So Reverend Schuler had that, and we're keeping it up.
Our thanks to Bishop VANN and his staff at the diocese. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are on my website. I'll bring you the latest news, commentary, and some fun throughout the week, why not? And I post the entire show there. If you sign up for my free e-blast, I'll send you all kinds of exclusives. Go to the center of the website page at RaymondArroyo.com to sign up for the e-blast. Join us next week when my guest will be esteemed actor and author Stacy Keach. Mike Hammer himself will join me in studio. Or is it Sir John Falstaff now? You'll have to find out then. Tune in. Until that moment, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you next time. Bye now.